Hey there, knowledge seekers! This is your ultimate destination for discovering the past, understanding the present, and imagining the future. Every video here is a window into a world of wonder, so let your curiosity guide you. Now we explain the formation of Holy Roman Empire.
The formation of the Holy Roman Empire stands as one of the most significant political and religious events in European history, a monumental transformation that bridged the collapse of the Western Roman Empire and the rise of medieval Christendom. It was not merely a rebirth of the ancient Roman Empire, but rather a fusion of Germanic strength, Christian ideology, and Roman legacy. The journey toward this complex entity began long before its official establishment in 800 CE, evolving through centuries of turmoil, migration, and the redefinition of power across Europe. When the Western Roman Empire fell in 476 CE, Europe was left fragmented and vulnerable. Germanic tribes such as the Ostrogoths, Visigoths, Vandals, Lombards, and Franks divided its once unified territories into a mosaic of kingdoms. The fall of Rome did not mean the disappearance of its culture or its ideals, for the Latin language, Roman law, and the Christian faith continued to influence the lands that were once under imperial rule. The bishops and monasteries that survived the chaos preserved not only the sacred texts, but also the intellectual traditions that would later shape the medieval world. Amid this changing landscape, the Franks, a confederation of Germanic tribes inhabiting the regions of modern-day France and Western Germany, began to emerge as a dominant power. Under the leadership of King Clovis I in the late 5th and early 6th centuries, the Franks consolidated their territories and converted to Christianity, a crucial decision that linked their royal authority to the spiritual legitimacy of the Roman Church. Clovis's baptism by Saint Remigius symbolized the union of Germanic power with Roman Christianity, setting a precedent for future rulers who would derive their legitimacy from divine sanction. As the centuries passed, the Frankish kingdom expanded, and the line of the Merovingian kings gave way to the Carolingians, a dynasty that would leave an indelible mark on European history. Among the Carolingians, one figure stood above all: Charlemagne, or Charles the Great. Charlemagne's reign from 768 to 814 marked a period of renewal and consolidation. He inherited a fragmented kingdom but transformed it into a vast empire encompassing much of Western and Central Europe. His military campaigns stretched from the Pyrenees to the Danube and from the North Sea to central Italy. Yet Charlemagne's ambition was not merely territorial. He sought to revive the ideal of a united Christian empire under divine authority, echoing the glory of ancient Rome. His rule brought both order and spiritual unity, establishing what would later be seen as the foundations of the Holy Roman Empire. Charlemagne's partnership with the Roman Church played a pivotal role in legitimizing his rule and shaping the destiny of medieval Europe. The papacy, weakened after centuries of invasions and political instability, sought protection and support from a powerful Christian monarch. In return, Charlemagne recognized the Pope's spiritual supremacy. This mutually beneficial alliance culminated dramatically on Christmas Day in the year 800, when Pope Leo III crowned Charlemagne as Emperor of the Romans in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. This act symbolized the fusion of Roman, Christian, and Germanic traditions and marked the birth of a new empire in the West. The coronation was not just a ceremonial event. It was a statement that the authority of the emperor came from God, mediated through the Church.
The implications of this event were profound. The Roman Empire, long fallen in the West, was now spiritually resurrected under a Christian banner. Yet, the new empire was fundamentally different from its ancient predecessor. The Holy Roman Empire was not a centralized state, but a complex network of territories held together by personal loyalties, oaths, and religious ideals. Its strength rested on the cooperation between the emperor and the pope, though this alliance would later become a source of deep conflict. Charlemagne's reign represented the zenith of early medieval statecraft, combining military might, administrative reform, and religious devotion. He established an efficient system of governance, with local officials known as counts and royal envoys called missi dominici to oversee justice and ensure loyalty. His efforts to promote education and literacy, often referred to as the Carolingian Renaissance, revived classical learning and preserved countless works of antiquity. Monasteries became centers of scholarship, and scriptoria copied ancient manuscripts, ensuring that the intellectual heritage of Rome survived into the medieval world. The idea of a universal Christian empire under a divinely appointed ruler resonated deeply throughout medieval Europe. However, Charlemagne's empire was also fragile, dependent on his personal authority and the loyalty of his vassals. After his death in 814, the empire passed to his son, Louis the Pious, whose reign was marked by internal strife and external pressure. The unity Charlemagne had built began to fracture as his sons quarreled over succession, leading to the Treaty of Verdun in 843. This treaty divided the Carolingian Empire into three parts: West Francia, roughly modern France; East Francia, the precursor to Germany; and Middle Francia, a central strip including Italy and parts of Burgundy and the Low Countries. The division of the empire was a turning point that shaped the political geography of Europe for centuries. While West Francia evolved into the Kingdom of France, East Francia laid the groundwork for what would later become the Holy Roman Empire. In East Francia, the decline of Carolingian authority opened the door for powerful regional lords and dukes to assert their independence. The fragmentation of power was characteristic of the feudal order that dominated medieval Europe, where loyalty was personal rather than institutional. Yet, even amid this decentralization, the idea of a universal Christian empire under a divinely appointed ruler did not disappear. The Germanic lands, with their rich ecclesiastical traditions and memory of Charlemagne's greatness, became the seedbed for the reemergence of the imperial ideal. The Church, too, maintained its vision of a Christian order guided by both spiritual and temporal authority. The 9th and 10th centuries were a time of profound instability. Viking raids from the north, Magyar invasions from the east, and Saracen attacks from the south created a constant atmosphere of insecurity. In response, local rulers fortified their lands and established new political structures to protect their people. Amid this chaos, a new power began to rise in East Francia, the Saxons. The Saxon dynasty, also known as the Luwaldathings, would eventually restore the imperial title and give birth to what historians recognize as the Holy Roman Empire. Henry the Fowler, Duke of Saxony, became king in 919 after the end of the Carolingian line in Germany. His reign marked a period of stabilization and consolidation, as he defended his territories against external threats and laid the foundations for a new political order. Henry's son, Otto I, known as Otto the Great, inherited his father's vision and ambition. Otto's reign, from 936 to 973, was instrumental in transforming the fragmented German kingdom into a cohesive and powerful entity. Like Charlemagne before him, Otto understood that legitimacy required both military success and divine endorsement. His decisive victory over the Magyars at the Battle of Lexfeld in 955 secured Germany's frontiers and ended decades of external raids. This triumph elevated Otto's prestige and established him as the protector of Christendom in the East. His close alliance with the Church further reinforced his authority. Otto appointed bishops and abbots to key administrative positions, intertwining ecclesiastical and secular power in a manner that would define the character of the Holy Roman Empire for centuries. By the mid-10th century, Otto's influence extended into Italy, where political instability provided both an opportunity and a challenge. The papacy was weakened by factionalism and interference from Roman nobles. Otto, perceiving himself as the defender of Christian order, marched into Italy in 951 and was crowned king of the Lombards. His involvement in Italian affairs deepened over the following decades as he sought to bring unity and reform to the church. In 962, a momentous event occurred. Pope John XII crowned Otto I as emperor, formally restoring the imperial title in the West. This act is often regarded as the true foundation of the Holy Roman Empire. Otto's coronation symbolized the continuation of the Roman imperial tradition through a Germanic Christian framework. The empire was now not merely a Frankish or Germanic kingdom. It was a trans-European institution that embodied the ideal of Christendom, united under one temporal and one spiritual authority. Otto's empire, though rooted in the legacy of Charlemagne, was more distinctly Germanic in character. It encompassed a federation of duchies, bishoprics, and principalities, each with varying degrees of autonomy, but bound by allegiance to the emperor. The emperor's power rested on his ability to balance the interests of these regional powers while maintaining the favor of the papacy. This delicate balance would define the politics of the Holy Roman Empire for the next 8 centuries. The concept of empire that emerged under Otto the Great was not one of centralized bureaucracy, but of a sacred hierarchy where temporal and spiritual realms intertwined. The emperor was seen as God's representative on earth, responsible for defending the faith and ensuring justice among his people. Yet, the alliance between emperor and pope, while essential to the empire's creation, also sowed the seeds of future conflict. Both institutions claimed divine authority, and both sought supremacy in guiding the Christian world. For the time being, however, the empire under Otto the Great represented a vision of unity and divine order. His reign brought relative stability to Germany and Italy, strengthened the church, and revived the idea of a universal empire. Otto's successors, though often struggling with internal divisions and papal opposition, would continue to uphold this ideal, ensuring that the Holy Roman Empire remained a central force in European history for centuries to come.
The coronation of Otto I in 962 CE marked the rebirth of imperial authority in Western Europe and the formal establishment of what history remembers as the Holy Roman Empire. Yet, the empire Otto founded was not a monolithic state, but a living organism that constantly evolved. Its foundations rested upon fragile alliances, the delicate cooperation between spiritual and temporal power, and the unending negotiation between emperor, pope, and princes. The empire was a tapestry woven of faith, feudalism, and ambition, and its survival depended upon the subtle balance of these forces. Otto's immediate successors sought to strengthen this balance. Otto II inherited his father's imperial title at a young age and attempted to continue the Carolingian Saxon legacy of unity between church and state. His marriage to the Byzantine princess Theophanu symbolized a union of Eastern and Western imperial traditions, bridging Latin Christendom and the Greek Orthodox world. This alliance with Byzantium, however, also introduced new complexities. Otto II's campaigns in southern Italy, aimed at extending imperial control, ended in disaster, and his early death in 983 left the empire in a precarious position. His son, Otto III, only 3 years old at the time, grew up deeply influenced by his Byzantine mother and the reform-minded church leaders surrounding him. Otto III's vision was far more spiritual and idealistic than his predecessors. He dreamed of a universal Christian empire guided not by conquest, but by divine order. His reign reflected the millennial optimism that swept Europe as the first millennium drew to a close, a belief that history was entering a sacred new age. Otto III envisioned Rome as the spiritual capital of this renewed empire, and sought to purify both the papacy and imperial governance. He installed reforming popes, such as his cousin Gregory V, the first German pope, and later Sylvester II, a scholar who shared Otto's ideals of learning and faith. Together, they attempted to create a harmonious partnership between emperor and pope, a joint rulership over Christendom symbolized by the titles Servant of the Apostles and Ruler of the World. Yet, such harmony proved elusive. Otto III's attempts to assert authority in Italy provoked resistance from Roman nobles and local powers. His premature death in 1002 at the age of 22 cut short his grand vision, leaving the empire once again at a crossroads. The imperial crown passed to Henry II, a distant cousin who would become the last of the Saxon emperors. Henry II focused less on universal ideals and more on strengthening the German kingdom and its church. Deeply devout, he worked to reform monastic life and reinforce ecclesiastical discipline. His reign also saw the formal recognition of the Kingdom of Burgundy as part of the empire, expanding its borders further into Western Europe. Henry's death in 1024 without an heir ended the Saxon line, but not the imperial dream. A new dynasty arose, the Salian or Franconian emperors. Their rule, beginning with Conrad II, marked a new phase of imperial consolidation. Conrad II reasserted imperial authority over rebellious dukes and extended influence in Italy and Burgundy. Under his son Henry III, the empire reached another moment of relative strength and unity. Henry III was not merely a ruler but a reformer. Distressed by the moral decay and corruption within the papacy, he intervened directly, deposing rival popes and appointing reform-minded clerics to the throne of St. Peter. His reign marked a period of cooperation between emperor and church, with the emperor seen as the protector and reformer of Christendom.
However, this harmony would soon shatter under his son Henry IV, whose reign, 1056 to 1106, plunged the empire into one of the most dramatic conflicts of the Middle Ages, the Investiture Controversy. At its core lay the question of who held the authority to appoint bishops and abbots: the emperor, who saw them as his vassals, or the pope, who claimed spiritual supremacy over the church. This dispute was not merely about appointments, but about the very nature of power in Christendom. When Pope Gregory VII issued the Dictatus Papae in 1075, declaring that the Pope held authority to depose emperors, Henry IV refused to yield. He continued to appoint bishops, asserting his divine right as emperor. The confrontation escalated rapidly. In 1076, Gregory VII excommunicated Henry IV, releasing his subjects from their oaths of loyalty and plunging the empire into chaos. Facing rebellion from his own nobles, Henry embarked on a desperate journey across the Alps in the winter of 1077 to seek absolution from the Pope. The scene at Canossa, where the emperor stood barefoot in the snow before the Pope's castle for 3 days, became one of the defining moments of medieval history. Though Gregory eventually lifted the excommunication, the event symbolized the humiliation of imperial authority before the church. The Investiture Controversy continued for decades, weakening both the empire and the papacy, and setting the stage for centuries of power struggles between the two institutions. The conflict's resolution came only in 1122 with the Concordat of Worms, which established a compromise. The church retained the right to invest bishops with spiritual authority, while the emperor retained a role in their temporal appointment. The settlement marked a turning point in medieval political thought, acknowledging a distinction between spiritual and secular spheres of authority. Yet the damage to imperial prestige was lasting. The empire, once seen as the divinely ordained unifier of Christendom, was now just one among several competing powers in Europe. Despite these challenges, the 12th century saw a revival of imperial ambition under the Hohenstaufen dynasty. Conrad III, and more famously Frederick I, known as Barbarossa, sought to restore the grandeur of the empire. Frederick's reign, 1152 to 1190,
epitomized the medieval emperor's struggle to assert control over the Italian city-states and the papacy, while maintaining order among the German princes. Charismatic and determined, Frederick envisioned the empire as a continuation of the Roman order, a divinely sanctioned hierarchy in which the emperor was second only to God. His use of the term Sacrum Imperium, Holy Empire, reflected this sacred mission. Frederick Barbarossa's policies aimed to centralize authority and strengthen imperial institutions. He reformed the legal system, promoting the study of Roman law at universities such as Bologna, which in turn provided a theoretical foundation for imperial sovereignty. Yet his assertion of imperial rights brought him into bitter conflict with the papacy. The cities of northern Italy, proud of their autonomy, resisted his attempts to impose imperial governors. Their defiance culminated in the formation of the Lombard League, an alliance of city-states backed by Pope Alexander III. The ensuing wars between the emperor and the League became a symbol of the broader struggle between central authority and local liberty. The conflicts reached its climax at the Battle of Legnano in 1176, where Barbarossa's forces suffered a crushing defeat. The subsequent Peace of Venice forced him to recognize the independence of the Lombard cities and reconcile with the Pope. Although his prestige recovered in later years through successful diplomacy and the launch of the Third Crusade, the dream of imperial dominance over Italy was permanently weakened. Frederick's death in 1190 while crossing the river Salif on his crusade marked the end of an era of heroic imperialism.
The Hohenstaufen legacy continued under his grandson, Frederick II, one of the most extraordinary figures of the medieval world. Born in 1194 to the union of the German and Sicilian crowns, Frederick II inherited a vast but divided realm. Educated in Sicily's cosmopolitan court, where Latin, Arabic, Greek, and Hebrew scholars mingled, he embodied a unique blend of cultures. When he became emperor in 1220, Europe found itself captivated by his brilliance, intellect, and ambition. Frederick sought to rationalize governance, codify laws, and limit the power of the feudal nobility. His constitutions of Melfi introduced a modern sense of centralized administration that anticipated later Renaissance states. Yet Frederick's independence and reforming zeal alienated the papacy, which viewed him as a threat to spiritual supremacy. His repeated conflicts with successive popes, Gregory IX and Innocent IV, led to his excommunication and the papal declaration that the empire itself was a danger to Christendom. The popes even called him the Antichrist, while Frederick countered by claiming divine inspiration for his rule. This mutual hostility plunged the empire into civil war. After Frederick's death in 1250, the empire entered a long period of fragmentation and decline, known as the Great Interregnum. During the Interregnum, 1254 to 1273, no universally recognized emperor ruled the empire. Rival kings and claimants, supported by competing factions of princes and the papacy, vied for power. This era exposed the deep fissures within the imperial system. Without a strong central authority, the German princes gained increasing autonomy, and the empire began to resemble a loose confederation of semi-independent states. The papacy, having destroyed the Hohenstaufen dynasty, overplayed its hand by trying to manipulate imperial elections. But the German electors, dukes, archbishops, and counts, used the chaos to enhance their privileges. The election of Rudolf of Habsburg in 1273 ended the interregnum and restored some semblance of order. Rudolf's reign signaled a shift in the nature of the empire. Rather than pursuing universal dominion, he focused on consolidating power within Germany and strengthening his family's hereditary domains in Austria. The rise of the Habsburgs would shape European politics for centuries. Under their stewardship, the empire transformed gradually from a universal Christian monarchy into a complex federation of regional powers. By the 13th century, the empire's structure became more formalized. The Golden Bull of 1336, issued by Emperor Charles IV,
codified the process of electing the emperor and identified 7 prince-electors who would hold this exclusive right. This document effectively institutionalized the decentralization of the empire, ensuring that the emperor's power would always depend on the cooperation of the princes. Yet Frederick's independence and reforming zeal alienated the papacy, which viewed him as a threat to spiritual supremacy. His repeated conflicts with successive popes, Gregory IX and Innocent IV, led to his excommunication and the papal declaration that the empire itself was a danger to Christendom. The popes even called him the Antichrist, while Frederick countered by claiming divine inspiration for his rule. This mutual hostility plunged the empire into civil war. After Frederick's death in 1250, the empire entered a long period of fragmentation and decline, known as the Great Interregnum.
The late medieval period of the Holy Roman Empire was characterized by both continuity and transformation, as centuries of political evolution, religious upheaval, and cultural change reshaped the empire's identity. By the 15th century, the empire had become a mosaic of semi-autonomous principalities, duchies, bishoprics, and free cities, bound together not by centralized power, but by the enduring symbolism of imperial authority and Christian unity. The emperors of this period faced the dual challenge of maintaining legitimacy in the eyes of both the papacy and the princes, while adapting to the rapidly changing political landscape of Europe. The structure of the empire, formalized in part by the Golden Bull of 1356 under Charles IV, ensured that the emperor's election was controlled by the prince-electors, making imperial power a delicate balance of diplomacy, persuasion, and patronage, rather than direct command. Charles IV's reign, 1346 to 1378, exemplified the art of negotiation and cultural leadership that became increasingly important for medieval emperors. By moving the imperial court to Prague and fostering education, law, and architecture, Charles reinforced the symbolic authority of the empire, even as actual control over distant territories remained limited. The establishment of the University of Prague in 1348 and the codification of imperial law strengthened the intellectual and legal underpinnings of the empire, giving it a sense of cohesion beyond mere military or territorial might. These initiatives reflected the broader trend in late medieval Europe of combining political power with cultural patronage, a hallmark of what would later emerge as the Renaissance. The rise of humanism and the intellectual currents of the Renaissance began to influence the Holy Roman Empire in subtle but profound ways. Scholars and artists, many drawn to the courts of princes and emperors, encouraged a revival of classical learning, literature, and art. The empire became a site of cultural exchange, where ideas from Italy, France, and the Low Countries converged. This intellectual revival fostered new visions of governance, civic responsibility, and the moral obligations of rulers, even as the practical realities of feudal fragmentation constrained imperial power. Emperors increasingly relied on diplomacy, marriage alliances, and ceremonial authority to project their influence, rather than the armies and vassal networks that had defined earlier centuries. The 15th and 16th centuries, however, also introduced crises that tested the resilience of the empire. Economic changes, population growth, and the rise of powerful city-states and kingdoms challenged the traditional order. The Protestant Reformation, beginning with Martin Luther's 95 Theses in 1717, profoundly altered the religious and political landscape of the empire. Luther's challenge to papal authority and the sale of indulgences ignited widespread debate and dissent, leading to a fragmentation of religious unity that had been a cornerstone of imperial ideology. Princes and rulers within the empire embraced the Reformation for both spiritual and political reasons, asserting independence from imperial and papal authority and choosing their territories' confessions. The resulting religious divisions created a complex patchwork in which Catholic, Lutheran, and later Calvinist regions coexisted, often uneasily, within the empire's borders.
The Holy Roman Emperor, traditionally a Catholic and a defender of the Church, faced unprecedented challenges. Charles V, who reigned from 1519 to 1556, confronted both external threats, such as the Ottoman Turks advancing into Europe, and internal divisions wrought by the Reformation. His vast Habsburg inheritance, which included Spain, the Netherlands, and parts of Italy, made him one of the most powerful rulers of his age. Yet, his authority within the empire was constrained by the autonomy of princes and the growing influence of cities. Charles sought to preserve Catholic unity and imperial cohesion, leading to decades of negotiation, warfare, and religious compromise. His abdication in 1556 marked the beginning of a new era, as the empire increasingly relied on local governance and negotiated settlements to maintain stability. The Peace of Augsburg in 1555, codified under Charles V's successors, established the principle of cuius regio, eos religio, allowing rulers within the empire to determine the religion of their own territories. While this agreement brought temporary peace, it also institutionalized the religious fragmentation that would dominate the empire for centuries. The emperor retained the symbolic and ceremonial authority of the office, but political and religious power became more decentralized, with princes, electors, and cities exercising significant autonomy. The empire's role as a unifying Christian authority was now symbolic as much as practical, reflecting a shift from universal imperial ambition to federated governance. The 30 Years' War, 1618 to 1648, further transformed the empire, illustrating both the vulnerability and resilience of its political system. Initially sparked by religious tensions between Protestant and Catholic states, the conflict quickly escalated into a pan-European struggle involving France, Spain, Sweden, and other powers. The devastation of the war was immense, with widespread destruction of towns, villages, and farmland across the German-speaking lands. Populations declined, economies were disrupted, and social structures were severely weakened. Yet, despite these catastrophic consequences, the empire survived. The Peace of Westphalia in 1648 not only ended the war, but also redefined the political order within the Holy Roman Empire, formalizing the sovereignty of individual states and confirming the emperor's limited authority over them. This settlement reinforced the empire's decentralized character while maintaining its symbolic role as a unifying institution. The post-Westphalian Empire continued to evolve into the early modern period. The emperor's power remained constrained, but the office retained prestige and ceremonial importance. The Habsburgs, who dominated the imperial title for centuries, relied increasingly on dynastic diplomacy, strategic marriages, and bureaucratic administration to maintain influence. The empire's structure allowed for remarkable diversity. Catholic, Protestant, and small independent states coexisted under a shared legal framework bound by tradition, law, and the enduring symbolic authority of the emperor. Imperial diets, courts, and councils mediated disputes, facilitated taxation, and preserved a sense of collective identity even in the absence of centralized control. Culturally, the Holy Roman Empire became a crucible of European innovation. Cities like Vienna, Prague, and Nuremberg flourished as centers of art, science, and learning. The printing press, introduced in the mid-15th century, facilitated the spread of ideas, literacy, and religious debate. Scholars, theologians, and philosophers debated governance, law, and ethics, contributing to the intellectual ferment that would culminate in the Enlightenment. Music, painting, and architecture flourished under the patronage of princes and emperors, reflecting both local identity and the broader influence of Renaissance humanism.
Despite internal divisions and external pressures, the Holy Roman Empire persisted as a distinctive political entity. Its unique combination of elective monarchy, feudal hierarchy, and religious symbolism allowed it to adapt to changing circumstances while preserving continuity with its Roman and medieval past. The empire's endurance was remarkable, lasting until 1806, when Napoleon Bonaparte's military campaigns and the reorganization of Europe finally dissolved it. By that time, the Holy Roman Empire had ceased to function as a unified polity in the traditional sense, but its legacy endured in the legal, cultural, and political frameworks of Central Europe. The concepts of federalism, religious tolerance, and negotiated sovereignty, which were honed within the empire, influenced later political developments in Germany, Austria, and beyond. In retrospect, the formation of the Holy Roman Empire represents both a culmination of early medieval ambitions and a testament to the resilience of institutions in the face of complexity and fragmentation. From Charlemagne's coronation to the Hohenstaufen reforms, the Investiture Controversy, the Reformation, and the Peace of Westphalia, the empire adapted continually, balancing tradition with innovation. It was an empire in which authority was negotiated, legitimacy derived from both spiritual and temporal sources, and identity was constructed through law, culture, and faith. Unlike modern nation-states, it never relied solely on centralization or uniformity, instead thriving on diversity, compromise, and the enduring idea of a Christian order under the emperor's symbolic leadership. Ultimately, the Holy Roman Empire's historical significance lies not only in its political achievements, but also in its intellectual and cultural influence. It preserved the memory of Rome, promoted legal and educational advancements, and served as a crucible for the complex interplay of religion, power, and diplomacy that shaped Europe. Its formation, expansion, and evolution revealed the dynamic processes by which medieval societies sought order, legitimacy, and unity amid fragmentation. The empire's story illustrates the enduring tension between ambition and limitation, between spiritual ideals and temporal realities, a narrative that continues to illuminate the intricate tapestry of European history.
Next story awaits. This story may end here, but the adventure continues. There's so much more waiting to be explored. So hit that subscribe button now and don't miss the next incredible story coming your way.